In his Republic, the Greek philosopher Plato describes something he calls the noble lie, a myth told by leaders to maintain social harmony. It's a lie, yes, but one that's carefully crafted, even necessary, to give people meaning, identity, and purpose. According to Plato, not everyone can handle the full weight of truth, so instead they're given a story, one that binds them together and justifies the world they live in. But what happens when those stories are questioned? When the myth cracks and people realize it was all built on a lie? That's what's now unraveling at the heart of the Eternal Land, and the Flame Reaver, who is definitely not Phynon, has decided to turn on his God of War 3 max difficulty settings and go to town on Amphoreus' demigods and heroes. But interestingly, it looks like he too seeks to initiate the miracle of Genesis. As we approach the end of the first core of Amphoreus' storyline, all roads are leading to a final confrontation between Phynon and not Phynon, the outcome of which will dictate how the rest of the saga of heroes will play out. So let's go over everything we learned during the Fall at Dawn's Rise to uncover who the Flame Reaver really is, his titanic significance in the story, and what he wants. Amphoreus' saga of heroes is structured in such a way that each of its Trailblaze mission chapters is written with an overarching theme guiding their narratives. The heroic saga of the Flame Chase explores conflict and strife, while Light Slips the Gate, Shadow Greets the Throne centers on Mother's love. Through the Petals in the Land of Repose delves into the purpose born from death. And The Fall at Dawn's Rise takes a page from Lineage's book as it's themed around the nature of truth and illusions. This theme is established right off the bat when Mem and the Trailblazer, as they were strolling around Styxia, get ambushed by the Flame Reaver. Or should I say, not Phynon. Only to find out that not Phynon is not Phynon, but the Demigod of Trickery, Cipher, instead. The reason Cipher can pull off this trick, as she explains, is thanks to Zagreus' authority of trickery, which allows her to weave illusions into reality so long as the onlookers believe her lies, an ability that proves to be very important later. Meanwhile, our favorite Vidyadhara High Elder, Daniel Hung, was showing Lycurgus the damaged Astral Express cart he and the Trailblazer used to enter Amphoreus. This is when Lycurgus reveals the secret behind another lie. He can open a path for the two Nameless to leave the Eternal Land while circumventing Aquila's firmament entirely, so long as they promise to abandon the Flame Chase journey. Don Hung rejects Lycurgus' proposal since the Chrysos Heirs are also his allies, which is when a shadow organization known as the Cleaners show up to intimidate him. These people were hinted at all the way back during the first conversation between Elder Cainus and Aglaya at the start of Amphoreus' story. They are a group that specializes in assassinating Chrysos Heirs and have done so in the world's current cycle ever since the Chrysos Wars under Cainus herself. In fact, Lygus reveals that the Cainus of today is the 27th one. This was all part of Cainus' plan. She also sent 3 cleaners to intercept Phynon and the Trailblazer in the Grove of Epiphany's library with the goal of distracting all capable individuals so that she and her men could close in on their main target, the demigod of romance, Aglaya. Just as Crateros shows up to help Don Hung, the Garment Maker informs everyone of the situation, but alas, by the time they reconvene in Ochema, Aglaya was declared dead by Hyacinthia. The Cleaners had already assassinated her with an enchanted dagger to the back, then threw her off the platform into the bathwaters below, thereby fulfilling the threat Cainus had given her previously. But this wasn't the end for Aglaya just yet, since she placed her consciousness and will in golden scarabs, buying herself just enough time to set things up for Phynon's success. What a truly considerate bug. First, Aglaya contacts Bartholos and Cythera, informing them of her death, then asks the latter to return to the Chrysos Heirs, now under Phynon's command, as her help is paramount to achieving their objectives. Cipher reluctantly agrees, after which she confirms the suspicion I had about the spirit thief Bartholos this whole time by revealing that he is none other than the Titan of Trickery, Zagreus, whom Cipher spared by tricking the trial of trickery itself. Yeah, talk about being good at lying, this cat is very sly. Zagreus' identity was apparent from a mile away, especially if you have been paying attention to the dialogue in Bartholos' exploration encounters. It's almost as obvious as not Phynon definitely not being Phynon. Aglaia then pays a final visit to Master Cartonus as he was forging Phynon's god-slaying blade, Dawnmaker. She asks him to utilize the Kremnoan soul-forging technique to condense the remainder of her divinity into an ornament so that she may still be of some use to the heroes later. Aglaia then proceeds to glaze Phynon for like 5 minutes straight, earning herself a spot in the Phynon fan club right behind me. After which, Cartonus delivers to Phynon his 5-star weapon buff and the ornament housing Aglaia's divinity. In total, that's 1084 base attack, 88.2 crit damage, 20% physical damage bonus, 100% luck, and plus 1000 points in feline friendship. Phynon immediately puts that final stat to good use by meeting up with Cipher at Dawncloud and instructing her to employ whatever tricks she needs to protect Kephal's Coreflame from all prying eyes as he sets off to slay the last titan to remain, Aquila. As history on Amphoreus has it, Hyacintia's skyfolk ancestors who worshipped Aquila built their god a great fortress in the sky, from which the Titan could oversee and govern all affairs of heaven. But because the black tide was a disaster which came from beyond the sky, Aquila naturally became the first Titan to succumb to its corruption and was driven into madness. To protect Amphoreus, Nikador pierced 99 of Aquila's 100 eyes, forcing the Sky Titan to retreat back into their fortress, where they ruled in tyranny until Hyacintia's ancestor, the brave hero Seliose, challenged Aquila, and with the help of her companions Solabis and Lunabis, became the first Chrysos Heir to slay a god, thereby kick-starting the Flame Chase journey, which continued 1000 years until the present day. However, we all know that the real flame chase journey of this cycle began with Tribios when she stole Yanis' Coreflame, then took a leap of faith to inherit the authority of passage, becoming the first demigod. So, how did Seliose come to be revered as the founder of the Flame Chase journey? Well, this is because technically Seliose was the first Chrysos Heir to kill a titan, but she never became a demigod. Instead, when Seliose saw how the sky was about to collapse upon Aquila's death, killing all those who dwelt below, she merged herself with the original titan, reviving him and taking the duty of upholding the heavens, trusting that one of her descendants shall return at the end of the flame chase to finish what she started. Or so says the lie, which all of Amphoreus was led to believe. You see, Seliose was no hero. In reality, she was as much a monster as those she despised. To reach the Sky Dome Fortress, Danhung accompanies Hyacinthia to gather blessings from her ancestors with which they can construct the Rainbow Bridge to the sky. During that process, Danhung reveals to Hyacinthia that he learned how to resonate with Amphoreus' waters well enough to send one person into the Vortex of Genesis. Of course, Danhung can do this because he is a high-ranking Vidyadhara and manipulating water is innate to their species. Once they're done, the two meet up with everyone in front of Kephal's divine body and set off to defeat the final titan. The hero's party that embarks to finish the flame chase consists of 6.5, technically 7 members. The iffy member is Aglaia in the form of the remainder of her divinity, because at the end of the day, she did save the rest of her party from falling to their death in golden lava, despite being in a severely weakened state. So I think it's fair to count her in, even if as an honorary member. The other 6 are the Trailblazer, in my case that's Kalis, Daniel Hung, Phynon, Mem, Hyacinthia, and we can't forget no, that meme is stupid, his name is Icarus. The last hero is Little Ika. Once there, the heroes meet— oh, actually, hold on, just in case anyone thinks that I don't refer to Icarus as fat fuck because I'm trying to be sensitive to his feelings or some bullshit like that, fret not, I would be the first in line to call a real-life obese person a fat fuck if needed. The idea that shaming isn't an effective tactic is a foolish luxury belief held by those who aren't in the shoes of someone who is actively destroying their life. Exercise is monetarily free, and there are plenty of cheap food options that are super healthy and taste good, like lentils, for example. I just don't think the title of fat fuck fits Icarus, that's all. I will admit, some of the memes are funny. But Ika is cute though, look at him. Anyway, soon the heroes meet and ally with Seliose's old companions Lunabis and Solabis, growing their party from 7 to 9. As they make their way through the Sky Fortress, they uncover the true history behind what transpired there 1000 years ago with Seliose. By the way, we also learned that Ika is a descendant of Lunabis. The Sky folk who worshipped Aquila in the Eye of Twilight used to be divided into 2 sects, the Sunborn and the Rainborn. Most Sunborn zealots saw themselves as superior to all others, citing Aquila's favoritism towards sunlight as justification for the oppression they inflicted upon their Rainborn kin. The Rainborn prayed to their god day and night, asking the Sky Titan why it had forsaken them, unaware that Aquila had not abandoned the clouds out of favor for the sun, but out of fear of the black enemy that lurked in the darkness. In time, a great hero with the strength to slay divinity was born of a rainborn priestess and a sunborn warrior. This was Seliose, and for all her life, she was shunned by both her clans. At first, Seliose directed all the ire she received towards the Sky Titan, believing that the hatred in her people's hearts came about as a byproduct of the unjust and tyrannical rule of their god. Heeding not the warnings of her elders, the foolish Day Thunder Knight turned her spear to Aquila, challenging the old titan in battle and killing him. But when Seliose turned her head to the people below, what she saw on their faces was not relief from a tyrant's death, but utter terror and confusion. Overwhelmed by madness from their faith's demise, the crowd began slaughtering one another senselessly in such a vicious manner that Solabis and Lunabis say comparing them to beasts would be an insult to the beasts. To quell the chaos, Seliose hastily decided to merge herself with Aquila, bringing back the Sky Folk's deity while hoping to establish for them a new order of her own, more just than what came before. This gave rise to a new sect of believers who elevated Seliose as their goddess. When she merged her mind with Aquila, Seliose came to understand many things. The Sky Titan never sought worship from humanity, nor ever decreed sunlight as better than clouds and rain. It was the humans who claimed as much. Thus, all division and suffering came from mortal hearts alone, something she then witnessed firsthand through her own worshippers. Her new believers perpetuated the karmic cycle of hatred by oppressing all those who yet worshipped old Aquila. At the same time, the weak old believers called her a witch and allied themselves with Cainus and the Cleaners in treason to kill the Chrysos Heirs. Lacking the wisdom to resist the influence of the Black Tide, Seliose grew disillusioned with humanity and concluded that mankind's corruption was a sickness without a cure, leading her to finally execute all old and new believers by dropping them into golden lava, so that they may finally know a semblance of unity. Phynon and Hyacinthia were taken aback by the truth behind Seliose's story. After all, this was the heroic figure who supposedly kick-started the Great Flame Chess journey, spearheading a 1000-year charge into the miracle of Genesis, with countless others living, fighting, and dying while striding bravely in her footsteps. Yet, Seliose was anything but a hero, She was a fool who became a monster. In the end, one Chrysos Heir, a nameless woman chosen by Cephalus' prophecy, stepped up to beg for mercy, promising that despite her many flaws, she would ensure that Seliose's epic is preserved through her children and their children's children, until the day where heroes shall rise from among them and return to the Sky Fortress to prove to Seliose that humanity is worth saving, that even the flawed and imperfect mortals she disdains can still bear the weight of the world. Seliose mocked the nameless woman, allowing her to live only to indulge her own hubris, while vowing to wait for the hero's destined arrival so that she could take pleasure in laughing at them in their final moments and at how their progenitress sold their unborn lives. That nameless woman became Hyacintia's real forebearer, and thus the entirety of the Flame Chase journey, spanning countless generations after her, was founded on the myth she fabricated of Seliose's history. This is the realization that struck Hyacinthia. Her entire lineage was spared on Seliose's whim, and all those who gave up their lives for millennia did so while believing in a cause founded on a lie. So, is their Flame Chase journey not tainted now? That's where the theme of this Trailblaze mission, along with Plato's idea of the noble lie, which I introduced at the start of this video, come into play. You see, the nameless woman was pragmatically correct in altering history to portray Seliose as a noble heroic figure. This isn't to say that I agree with falsifying historical accounts, but I understand the logic. Amphoreus' flame chase is an endeavor greater than any single life in it, and at that time, the nameless woman on her own likely did not know anything about its future, including how long it was going to last. Such a journey greater than life necessitated a central figure equally greater than life, in whom her successors could look up and aspire to. And she was no fit for this role because, well, she was a nameless woman, which is supposed to narratively indicate that she was legitimately a nobody. Therefore, you can't expect anyone to dedicate their entire life following the footsteps of a throwaway Chrysos Heir of no renown, one whose life was randomly spared on a titan's whim. And she was wise enough to realize this unfortunate truth. Seliose, on the other hand, was neither a saint nor a hero, but she was revered as a goddess by many before her madness, and so she possessed the qualities to inspire many more generations to come. Thus was the tale of the Day Thunder Knight born, the daughter of Dusk, the first Titan Slayer who sacrificed her place amongst the demigods to save Amphoreus. The heroic legend of Seliose, though it was a fabrication at the foundation of the Flame Chase, ignited a fire in the hearts of those who believed in its ideals, driving them to achieve many miracles and accomplish many great deeds. From this perspective, the nameless woman's noble lie served its purpose well. To keep the flame burning long enough, to keep the journey going long enough until a true hero, a deliverer and his party show up to end Seliose's 1,000-year madness. Of course, victory against Aquila came at a price, since to save her comrades from meeting the same fate as the Skyfolk, Aglaia ended up herself falling into the lake of golden lava, thereby fulfilling her part of the prophecy with a final bath in warm and radiant gold. But Aglaia did so only after exhausting literally everything she had in body, mind, will, and divinity, so it's time we put some respect on her name. Anyway, Hyacinthia then utilizes the core flame of the sky, and Phynon yaps about how strong his sword is before they kill Seliose for good. Alright, so we finished discussing the Nameless Woman's noble lie, but truth be told, Amphoreus is built on a configuration of several fundamental lies, so much so that lies in this world directly shape reality. And who better understands this concept than the Demigod of Trickery, Cipher? 1,000 years ago, Cipher grew up in abject poverty, relying on theft and trickery to live by until she was taken in by Aglaia. One day after ascending to divinity, Cipher found herself in the bedchamber of Kephales's priest, Chaplain Phoros, during the final moments of his life. She learns from him that the Sky Father had set a deadline of 300 years for the prophecy, and by extension, the lifespan of Amphoreus. To try providing everyone a greater chance at survival, Cipher attempted the impossible. She took the form of Phoros' successor, Atticus, and through his tongue proclaimed to the people of Okhema that the world-bearing Titan's protection shall last eternal, instructing them to hold a 100-day feast in celebration, and saying that every child born in Okhema from now forth must fully believe with all their heart and hold to their faith true. The light of the dawn device never fades. Kephales's protection has no end. Having acquired the people's faith with Atticus's words, Cipher used the authority of trickery to weave the lie she told them into the fabric of Amphoreus, making it a reality while ensuring that not a single soul would know the truth except her. Now, it's debatable if Bartholos knew Cipher's secret but kept silent, given that he is the Trickery Titan Zagreus himself, and it's also worth noting that Aglaia had her suspicions as well, but she was wise enough not to pursue the matter too much. Nonetheless, Aglaia did warn Cipher that lies are by their nature fickle. The moment a crack forms in them, the whole thing will soon crumble and be exposed. In this case, Cipher's life was the foundation of her great noble lie. So, for 700 years since the passing of Kephales's deadline, she became the sole pillar holding all of Amphoreus. This is why previously Cipher tended to avoid dangerous situations or encounters. It's not because she is lazy or a coward, it's because the entire world depended on her staying alive. The moment she breaks, the entire world goes down with her. Fortunately, Cipher had been a demigod for 1,000 years, so she can easily take care of herself against Cainus' cleaner goons. Unfortunately, however, the Flame Reaver shows up, which sucks since not Phynon did not have the plus 100 points buff in feline friendship that Phynon got earlier, since, well, you know, he's not Phynon. So instead, Cipher and the Reaver play a game of cat and mouse all over Styxia as he hunts her down for Kephales's core flame. Except he is the cat and she is the mouse in this situation. Yeah, anyway, look at this aura farm. Realistically, Cipher never stood a chance against a guy who kills demigods for a profession, but she still managed to buy some precious time for Phynon and the rest of the heroes until she was finally struck down. As the unsung hero of Amphoreus, Cipher betrayed the world to grant humanity 1,000 years more time, managing to tell a lie so perfect, so brilliant that it changed the course of history. And when her life faded away, the illusion shattered with it, revealing the truth of Amphoreus for all to behold. Simultaneously, back at the Sky Fortress, the heroes faced a dire ultimatum. Aquila and Kephale were the two greatest titans on Amphoreus, presiding over the orders of heaven and creation. But now, with Aquila gone, there was no one left to uphold the sky. Worst still, the Dawn device that rested upon the Sky Father's shoulders had been a gift from the Sky Titan. So, with Core Flame in hand, Hyacinthia asks Daniel Hunk to use his water-bending technique one more time and open a path into the vortex of Genesis for her. With the help of Trinon, Hyacinth submits the Sky Core Flame to the voice of the tides and confines herself to the sky to heal it, effectively sacrificing her life in the process. And the legacy of Aquila ends with Seliose deeply regretting her past and admitting that her legend was nothing but a lie disguised in heroic tales and passed down through millennia. Back at Dawncloud, Phynon immediately begins looking for Cipher, trusting that she kept Kephal's core flame safe. And it's important to point out that by now Phynon has changed a lot from the one whom the Trailblazer and Donhung met in the Abyss of Fate. He has become much more ruthless. And you can notice this shift in behavior from the gradual change in his tone throughout this Trailblaze mission.
Anyone who dares stand in our way will get a taste of Dawnmaker's Edge.
Oh, and Kynus dies during a skirmish with Black Tide Creations, but let's be honest, no one cares. Then, not Phynon shows up looking for the same thing as them, except he knows Cipher is already dead. The heroes try to avoid him at first given the obvious time constraints, but he eventually catches up to them, and it's clear that he lost his mind at this point, operating primarily on instincts. However, we surprisingly learn that not Phynon— hold on, actually now that I'm saying it out loud, there is absolutely nothing surprising about this. Yeah, not Phynon wants to reset Amphoreus using the Miracle of Genesis, just like Phynon. Oh my god, what an insane plot twist! Phynon does justifiably wonder though, if the outcomes they seek are the same, then why does the Flame Reaver hinder the Chrysos Heirs so much? However, the Flame Reaver is a really nice guy and decides to help our heroes by expediting their reunion with Cipher, until Maidemos rudely interrupts the Reaver's transportation services, then engages him in combat with the assistance of Castoris, while Tribi opens a sentry gate for Phynon, Kaelis, and Donhung to directly reach Ochima, then stays behind to help the two demigods. There, the trio find the citizens barely surviving thanks to Hyacinthia's protection with her newly acquired divinity. An already injured Cartonis tells the heroes to keep going forward while he stays behind to ward off the Black Tide beasts. And as they rush towards the Vortex of Genesis, surprise surprise, it's the Flame Reaver again, which means he has already dispatched of both Maidemos and Tribi. As of version 3.3, we still don't know what happened to Castoris, but the implication is that she either got killed or exhausted all of her power. At last, it's now Donhung's time to step up and put his Videodara High Elder techniques to some good use, challenging not Phynon so that his two friends can make their final push. And to be honest, we shouldn't gloss over how strong not Phynon is, given how he manages to gain the upper hand against the freaking Imbibitor Lune. Granted, Donhung is pretty nerfed in his current state, but this puts not Phynon at least on par, but most likely stronger than the Xianzhou generals, which is extremely impressive. But this makes a lot of sense given how he can quickly recover from fatal injuries, summon an unknown number of clones, and act as a perfect vessel for all Titan core flames. And keep in mind, not Phynon is only one half of the formula, since we still have Phynon himself, and for a while now I have suspected that the two are going to merge together, something that has been semi-confirmed by the developers in the 3.4 livestream, which shows Phynon becoming this godlike entity who is most likely the Lord Ravager on Amphoreus. Before the Vortex, Phynon makes one last sacrifice. He gives Kaelis a farewell letter telling him that he has already made preparations for the Nameless to leave Amphoreus. Phynon claims he did this because the stories Donhung told him about the Nameless's trailblaze across different worlds, especially those of Billabog and Penacony, touched him deeply and made him realize many things. Bro, look at this NPC's expression behind Phynon while he goes on his dramatic speech. Holy shit, I can't. Ultimately, Phynon tells Kaelis that he cannot let his journey end here after making the calculus that there are many more worlds out there that need the Trailblazers aside from Amphoreus. Thus, due to the uncertainty of Amphoreus' outcome, he asks Kaelis to leave everything to him and return to Donhung. Yeah, anyway, all of that goes directly in the trash because we literally see Stella with Phynon in the Vortex of Genesis in version 3.4's trailer, XDD. But here's the coolest part of this whole quest in my opinion. Phrynon, the last remaining of Tribius's fragments, meets Phynon to send him to the Vortex since Fagusa's waters had dried up during the world's doomsday. And when he asks her where Kephal's core flame is, she pulls out an envelope letter from Cipher, which turns out to be Bartholos in disguise. Bartholos then reveals to Phynon that he is in fact the Titan Zagreus, who was kept alive thanks to Cipher's deceiving of his trial of trickery. However, since Cyphera is now dead, all of her lies are gone, just like the one she wove about Kefali's protection. This, combined with Aquila's own death, is why the world is ending after all. Zagreus explains to Phynon that he and Cyphera always sought to pull off the greatest trick in history. So, although he should have perished when Cyphera's lies faded, to counteract that, they hid Kefali's core flame, which can sustain any titan, inside his belly to prolong his life just enough so he can deliver the world-bearing authority to Phynon. And to be extra safe, they kept the titan himself with the Trinon, since no one would expect someone as weak as her to have Kefali's core flame. Zagreus then mocks the world in laughter before removing the final core flame from himself, telling the deliverer to remember this well. In the end, what saved Amphoreus was not the might of Kefali, nor the prophecies of Oronyx. Rather, it was the lie of a cat thief, and he, Zagreus, the coward scorned by all. Such a good scene. Trinon then bids farewell to her hero, since opening the Century Gate into the Vortex of Genesis will likely exhaust all of her remaining life force. This understandably breaks Phynon's heart, but Trinon comforts him, saying that she fully believes in him, not because of any prophecy, but deep down in her soul. She trusts that he shall become the rising sun to usher in the morning light of a new tomorrow. We then transition to a scene with Herta and Scrulum where they reveal a number of extremely important secrets. First of all, they have already destroyed one of Lycurgus's bodies, but as expected, he still has many more lying around. They also suspect that Kefali's divine body is likely related to Amphoreus' Lord Ravager, further increasing the likelihood that this lord is indeed Phynon. It's also pretty clear that something happened off-screen between this scene and Herta's initial encounter with Lycurgus, since Herta and Scrulum are now aware that Amphoreus' disaster is tied to Emperor Rubert's scepter, in addition to the fact that Black Swan told Scrulum how March 7th's condition is due to her being trapped inside Amphoreus. These last two details are particularly interesting in light of what happens in the final scene of The Fall at Dawn's Rise, where we are shown a nameless version of Phynon who is clearly different from the one we are used to so far, discussing the fate of Amphoreus with Lycurgus. This man is probably the one advertised by Hoyoverse as the Nameless Hero, who engraves the marks of eternity. I believe he will be the playable unit we receive in version 3.4, but don't worry, even though we still don't know his real name, he is also Phynon, and I say this in the same way as I do with the Flame Reaver. They are all Phynon. Thanks to Anaxagoras, we know that Amphoreus is cyclical in nature, where the demigod of world-bearing from the last cycle was called Chaos. That's the ancient Greek pronunciation of chaos. And since the Flame Reaver also seeks to employ the miracle of Genesis, perhaps he is Chaos. But if the Flame Reaver is Chaos, then how could he also be Phynon? Well, that's because Chaos is Phynon, just the one from the previous cycle. You see, I wonder if the purpose of the Flame Reaver is to serve as both a jailer and a qualification examiner for Phynon. At the end of every cycle, the Phynon of that cycle has to face his Reaver shadow to earn his freedom. Failure to do so indicates that Phynon has yet to meet the set criteria, causing the Reaver to kill him and absorb him into his clones, then become Kefali and reset the world for another cycle, until Phynon finally wins, in which case he absorbs the Reaver and gains his true form. This might explain why the Flame Reaver is depicted as slashing an infinity symbol in his nuke attack, since infinity is also the symbol of Amphoreus itself. But then again, the infinity might have more to do with Cyrene. Speaking of Cyrene, she shows up in the end to tell the nameless Phynon how their story will be a romantic one, after which we get the achievement where all endings begin. Amphoreus' storyline has certainly turned out to be very different from what I expected going into it, but honestly, I am still happy with the direction things are heading because now it looks like major factions and characters are going to be involved, like the Lord Ravagers and whoever the heck Lycurgus turns out to be. I've seen a lot of people speculate that he is connected to Rubert himself. We shall see. As always, a huge thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, and thank you for watching till the end. For now, I've been My Name for Now, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.